We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first I have to tell you all about this game-changing product I use before a night out with drinks. It's called ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. Pre-Alcohol is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and you'll feel your best tomorrow. I won't lie, I was a bit on the fence about ZBiotics initially, but I gave it a shot and I was impressed with the results. Vacations, weddings, birthdays and reunions, there's so much going on. Get the most out of your summer plans by stocking up on pre-alcohol now. Go to zbiotics.com/race to get 15% off your first order when you use RACE at checkout. Pre-alcohol is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/race and use the code RACE at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times.
This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the vehicle owner's manual for important feature limitations and information.
The Athletic.
Hello and welcome to the Race IndyCar Podcast, a brilliant gateway race to get into, one that we feared would not have as much overtaking as you might like from an oval race after a test that happened not long before the race itself, but fear not, all of the drivers were wrong after that test. It turned out that the racing was great. We had lots of side-by-side action, and if that's not enough for you, we had some brilliant strategy going on. We had lots of late race restarts and cautions. We had a really slow late race restart that we'll definitely get into a little bit more on the pod. And we also had willpower flipping the bird at someone, which is more common than you would probably think when you add them all up, but is at least unusual in the sense that it's the first time this season that we've seen willpower flipping the bird at his teammate, no less. A teammate that I would never flip the bird at, JR Hildebrand, is alongside me. How you doing, JR? It's been a little while since we've recorded, but it's nice to have you back. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this one. It was a fantastic race.
You say that now, there's always a chance, but I appreciate. Does
it count when I'm doing it under the desk where you can't see exactly. Under the camera? Does that count? That
still counts. Yeah, definitely still counts.
Okay.
I feel like you're already rescinding your statement here, but yeah, it's good to be back. It's definitely good to be back. This was a race that was just full of, I feel like, nuances and kind of intricacy that made it interesting. If you could pick them out. So excited to jump into it with you here for sure.
Yeah, we'll get into all of that. We'll get into lots of late race drama, especially a fantastic race. And we'll also jump over and speak to Toby Sowery a bit later on, who's made 2 starts for Dale Coyne Racing, and we'll be back this weekend at Portland, which we also need to remember to have a quick chat about. This will be our last episode before the Portland race as well. Races coming thick and fast. IndyCar, I love the Olympics, but please don't do that again. That gap was way too long. We definitely need some more strung out racing than what we've just had there. That was way too big a gap. JR, let's get into it with that late race restart. If you've not watched the race yet, definitely pause the pod, go and watch the YouTube highlights, have a little look at what happened, because it was definitely a an interesting one to finish the race. We had a late race restart where we had Will Power taken out. Obviously, he was second in the championship coming into this race at Gateway. He was taken out by Alexander Rossi on a late race restart. Will Power was very unhappy about all of this. As I said earlier, he flipped the bird at his teammate, Josef Newgarden. He was a little bit more measured in his interview after the race once he'd sworn at Dylan Welsh for a little while there. That's another video you can go and find on social media. Dylan trying to get an interview of Will, and his initial response was to send some expletives Dylan's way before very nicely calling him back and giving him an interview. But yeah, definitely an interesting one because we've had this kind of situation before. We've had slow restarts on ovals. It's a really interesting one because as far as all of the information that we have, IndyCar say that Josef Newgarden kept a steady speed of 80 miles an hour, but there's quite a lot going on here. He was clipped by Scott McLaughlin under the just as he was restarting, which caused a little wiggle. We saw cars checking up. We saw Alexander Rossi obviously hit the back of Will Power and go over the top of him. And Rossi said he had a few less people on his Christmas card list after this, which I'll be interested to get your thoughts on. JR, I want to start with all of this really, not just getting your opinion on the restart itself, but also just kind of putting yourself in the car for a moment from the driver's perspective. You're always so good at giving us that perspective, and I wonder how you feel this all played out, and is there any blame that we can apportion in all this? Because as far as the rules go, it appears Josef didn't do anything wrong in terms of how he played out. Obviously, if we'd have had a faster restart, and the good chances we wouldn't have had a crash happen in the way that it did. But it's up to Josef to decide the speed of the restart within reason, as long as it's safety car speed. So I'm kind of interested if you felt like there's any blame to be apportioned here, or was this more of like a racing incident and something that maybe we'll continue to look at, before the next oval race?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. It's like if there's some blame to go around, I guess, in different contexts. You can blame Josef for taking advantage of the way that the rules are written, and that, he's basically allowed to do everything that he did there. It's late in the race. I think blame generally, if we're gonna apply it, should be, or responsibility, I'll put it that way, should be applied to every car that's behind him that was getting super antsy to try to jump the restart. Like, basically, if everybody just actually waited, you're not going to necessarily in those situations, but he did go. I mean, basically what happened here was that Newgarden chose a very slow, like a speed that is on the very low end of what's sort of allowable here. And I guess just for the sake of some context, it's not like you're staring at a speedometer in the car, so you don't know exactly what the speed is. He's basically he's trying to put himself in a rev range in a gear. And so that's just going to kind of dictate a speed. He would have been behind the pace car and known kind of about at pace car speed, like what that gear and rev range is. So you're sort of basing, so it could be 5 miles an hour higher than pace car speed. It could be right at pace car speed. It could be 5 miles an hour below pace car speed. Like, there's kind of a range there, basically, where you're choosing a speed just based on feel, kind of based on RPM. So I guess that's just worth pointing out here, that like, although we look at it from the outside as pace car speed, in the cockpit you don't have that context, so you're thinking about it like in a different way. He also has a restart zone that he knows where the start of the restart zone and the end of the restart zone is. Basically, the way the rules are written in IndyCar, more or less, is that they're going to throw the green flag when you get to the end of the restart zone, like one way or the other. That's kind of the thing that should kick off throwing the green. If not, the leader is just already going. And so then if that happens like really early in the restart zone, then they have sort of the ability or the wiggle room at that point as stewards to just say, okay, everybody's going. We've waited for a second to allow that initial acceleration to happen. Now we're throwing the green. Now passing is available. Like, that's the thing that, the green flag basically allows for at that point, is for you to pull out a line. and start making a pass. So when it's on the low end of speed and you're waiting all the way until the end of the restart zone, what that just naturally creates for is a lot of hesitations, plural, from all of the cars that are stacked up behind you who are trying to kind of game when that acceleration is going to occur. So the slower the speed is, the more abrupt those little accelerations and decelerations, like trying to kind of guess when the actual acceleration is going to occur, happens. Like the more abrupt and kind of like intense basically those accelerations are, just simply the physics of it. Like if you're going faster to start with, the car doesn't accelerate as quickly, even if especially if it's just for a very brief period of time. If you're going like 80 or 90 miles an hour or whatever it is, and you're right in the top of the RPM band in, we'll call it probably second gear, or you're in the middle of the RPM band in second gear, that millisecond of, oh, I think Newgarden's going to go, so I'm going to like kind of start rolling into it, does create quite an acceleration in a way that when you're in the middle of third gear, it doesn't. So that's part of it. The other part of it is just he waited for so long, like waited all the way until the end of the zone. You've got a lot more of that, a lot more time for guys to be thinking that that eventual leader's acceleration is going to happen. So I think it's kind of what this comes down to for me is the responsibility of everybody behind Newgarden to maintain the same pace, like not try to not jump the gun on anticipating the leader's acceleration and just go when the leader goes. You're not gonna make a pass. McLaughlin's not gonna get by him on the restart by doing it that way. But the reality of it is, like, you don't know when the leader is going to go. So having this like anticipation of that is not really the right strategy anyway. Whether it's fast or slow or early or late, like you got to kind of just like trust your reaction to the actual acceleration. Every once in a while you might get it right if you try to anticipate it and you jump it, but you're going to end up getting it wrong just as probably more frequently than you get it right in that situation. And even if you get it right, like it all depends on when they throw the green flag to whether or not you'll be able to pull out and make any use of it anyway. I mean, half the time if you do get it right, you're having to drag a little break because they haven't thrown the green, and so you can't pull out a line one way or the other. So all of this just comes down to the fact that it was slow and late made it so there was a lot of extra time for much more abrupt little micro anticipatory like accelerations from everybody else. What actually kicked all this off is that McLaughlin ran into the back of Josef. They both checked up briefly, basically. Like he ran into the back of him right when Josef was going to start accelerating. And so Josef kind of briefly did check up when he got run into the back of, I think. And then just went because he was like, he was as deep into the acceleration zone as he could get. So he was getting ready to accelerate. I mean, he had to be getting ready to accelerate at that point anyway. McLaughlin checking up then creates a difference between the lead. I mean, you could see it when they showed McLaughlin's onboard, which was Josef then does accelerate. McLaughlin is not right on him. So that creates kind of a weird stack up for the cars that are behind him. So whether it was actually this initial little bit of contact that McLaughlin then has to kind of briefly get out of it, or the fact that they are then out of sync in their accelerations, that just backs everybody up. Like I think like Colton coming over the radio as the car that was third in line there, immediately saying that Newgarden was jockeying back and forth, I think that even is BS. Like he's perceiving that the leader is doing that because McLaughlin's doing it, basically, in reaction to like as he's trying to anticipate Newgarden, he's like, dragging brake probably, but like rolling in and rolling back out of throttle, like thinking he's about to go, but then not happening. So he's like rolling back out and having these little like micro adjustments along the way, which then when you're going that slow creates an accordion that backs up through those top 5 or 6 guys. So, this is an instance where I feel like Josef was just getting absolutely hammered by all of the drivers that got interviewed about this when he's just taking full advantage of what's available to him and doing it by the book, basically. Like he was not jacking guys around, you know. And so, I guess like if there's something to look at here, it's like, do you want to change the rules so that like you just can't be going that slow, or so the restart zone is shorter or something so you don't have as much. But I'm totally against all of that stuff. Like we've talked about this on the pod before. It comes into play more at Indianapolis, like more at the places that, like Gateway is less of a place where you're a sitting duck if you're the leader, just because the straightaway is not as long, so you don't get like a big slipstream on the leader going towards turn one. But I think the leader, whoever they are, should always have an advantage in terms of, and the only way they get an advantage on restarts is by having options that the rest of the cars can't know exactly how they're gonna approach the restart. And I think that is essentially what occurred here. Is Josef he was really far on like the edge of the spectrum of what's allowable here, and that created for a bunch of little things that made this stack up that had nothing to do with him actually instigating it.
IndyCar did confirm that he maintained speed, so I'm glad you raised the point about not having a speedometer, because I think that plays into it. I mean, drivers are not going to be looking at their steering wheel for long periods of time on a restart. Obviously going to be looking up and looking around you and trying to obviously be aware of the situation around you. But I think it is worth mentioning, if we know that Josef was at a similar speed, then you might ask, as you kind of alluded to, why was everyone kind of going and stopping, going and stopping, going and stopping? Because if Josef is doing the same speed, then the only explanation is that everybody else were the ones that were trying to jump or anticipate him going. And that was causing the kind of concertina effect of cars going quicker, slowing down, going quicker, slowing down. So if that is correct, that we know that Josef was at a steady speed, then it's kind of hard to forgive everybody behind that kind of were being aggressive in that sense, trying to jump the start. But I kind of understand if you haven't got a speedometer in front of you, then you are also trying to you're kind of guessing what speed Josef is doing and trying to hold yourself at that speed. And I guess that is a lot more difficult in practice than it would be if you were just sat, in your car on the freeway with cruise control, or just kind of looking at your speedometer and seeing what speed you were going at. But yeah, I think I agree with you. I think Josef got a lot of stick for how he kind of executed this restart. And if everything we've been told is correct, then he's not done anything against the rules there, and he's executed that in a way that is acceptable, and that everybody else behind has got a responsibility to just be safe and not try to jump things there. And I think the other thing is it's easy to, in these situations where you've got people going forwards, going backwards, you can get caught out very quickly by someone slowing down extremely abruptly, and then you literally have nowhere to go and you're kind of just taken out of that scenario. But there's also you trying to jump the start in a way that gives you an advantage, which I understand because it's extremely valuable to get a jump on a restart in IndyCar, especially when things are so competitive. But yeah, I think Rossi was just a little bit too aggressive there for me. I might get blasted for that, but I think it would be interesting to see his data as well, to see kind of where he was at with everything. But yeah, that was a really interesting thing to bring up about not having the speedometer, because it does give you that extra bit of perspective about trying to maintain speed on a restart there.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I saw the data that like I have witnessed the data for like what went on here.
Ooh.
And like it entirely supports that, like all of these points in essence, that There's there was not jockeying back and forth from the leader in this situation. It was very late, and but all within the bounds of where the timing lines are, where all of that stuff is. So I think I only bring that up just to say that we don't have I'm not talking about this just strictly in the context of what it looked like.
Yeah.
Like it was actually all within bounds. And so it's I don't really I don't put much in feeling bad for guys or celebrating, be feeling good for guys when they you know, whatever, end up on the right side of these kinds of things otherwise or not. Like they're kind of just ultimately to me, they're just racing incidents. And you sort of hope, I guess, that once everybody cools off and has a look at everything, that they realize that they sort of need to be, a lot of, in this situation, a lot of people who I think drivers and teams who were bitching about this, like hopefully will look back and take a slightly more accountable, you know, look at what they were doing and kind of their own situation to try to understand that. I mean, I've had this happen. I've been in this boat, even just stacking up on, under yellow, like under pace car speed, basically. So it's a very easy thing to do, because in part also because the slower you're going, you are all just stacked up much more closely together. And so again, to the initial point, the speed of the restart, I think, had as much to do with this as how late it was, just in that it makes it so that all of those little little accelerate, little roll into the throttle at that speed is just more powerful in terms of how much you accelerate and how much ground you soak up relative to the car in front of you in a given period of time. And so when that happens, second car in line, third car in line, fourth car in line, I think Will was fourth car in line there, right? He has a significant gap to close up, and then braking, heavy braking, basically. Rossi's doing the same thing right behind him. I think I'm also on the side of like some of these things are just Rossi is, by the time it gets to that point, he's a little bit of just a passenger also, basically. But it's not anybody else's, to have that not happen the next time. All of those guys basically just need to look inward. Like there are ways to avoid having this happen when it is done by the book. Then you have to sit there and recognize, like, all right, if this was done by the book, then this could happen exactly like this again. And I could have somebody in front of me who wrongly anticipates the acceleration. And so what am I going to do to avoid this outcome, the next time around? I think all of these guys are so good, and they are all learners still in terms of their mindset. Like, they will all eventually look at it that way. But I would say that it did, even just watching it, like, it did make me feel bad in a sense for Josef, because it was like, these guys they're just totally railing on the guy, when they are in essence all the ones, as a system, they are the ones that screwed it up. So I think, Will in particular, like, I do think it's kind of hilarious when he just goes into full rage mode, but it was like borderline unprofessional, I thought, in this particular situation. Like, it was unwarranted a little. I mean, I thought the same thing when he crashed into Dixon, or when Dixon crashed into him, or whatever, in practice at Road America last year. That was kind of like, this is just the sort of heightened level of this response seems just way over the top to me.
And David Malukas has said that Power had screamed at him after that incident as well. And I don't want to get into that.
Same thing there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just a completely undeserved reaction to have that unfortunately, like, guys don't forget. Malukas won't forget that. Not that Malukas is the type of guy that'll hold that against Will, but it's the type of thing that'll just like rub you the wrong way. And even if it's in the context of just like a WTF, dude. Like it'll sink in and kind of stick with you that way.
And we'll get into that incident and more in just a moment.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
We talked about Colton Herta a moment there. I just wanted to briefly divert away from Penske because we'll get back to them in a minute to talk a little bit about Colton's weekend. I'm just kind of intrigued as to how you felt it kind of went, because obviously I had the crash in qualifying after being so strong in testing and coming into this race weekend looking really strong, and all of the other Andretti cars were in the top 10 in qualifying, obviously apart from him after that crash. So significantly tied an arm behind his back in that scenario. But when it came to the race, he delivered one of the best. We're talking about starts a lot in this race. His restart was absolutely incredible. If you've not seen it yet, definitely encourage you to go back. IndyCar shared it on their Twitter, and also it was in the 30-minute highlight package that's shared on YouTube as well. It kind of took me back to a dark place of the COVID lockdown times of watching esports, because it felt like Colton had the difficulty on easy and was just playing a video game, but he definitely wasn't. Obviously worked himself back into contention, which is a big win coming from the back of the pack, to obviously finish fifth. He had that late penalty for blocking Linus Lundqvist that dropped him back behind Alex Palou in a scenario where he actually would have taken points out of Palou, but in fact actually was a spot below. Given all that, it's a very complicated weekend to kind of unpack, but I'm intrigued, JR. Was that a win of a weekend for Colton, or do you think there's something been lost there, and an opportunity lost, let's say?
I think you could easily look at it in either way. In terms of the kind of coulda, shoulda, woulda part of it, then coulda, woulda, shoulda, whatever the sequencing of that is.
Close enough.
Then it's a missed opportunity potentially to certainly to at least be standing on the podium at the end of it. If he starts better, then potentially on any of the strategies. I mean, he didn't. I think the most impressive thing. So this is kind of like mixing the two of these sides of the fence together. But the most impressive thing about it was that he didn't really at any point have a particular strategic advantage that he used to get up into where he was. There was periods of the race where it was the way the race ended up unfolding. It was actually quite difficult to work out in the end whether any of the strategies that weren't ultimately what like Newgarden and McLaughlin were doing were positioned. Like there was a period of time I thought where the Power Malukas, the kind of slight difference that they were, the slightly different version of strategy that they were on from Newgarden and McLaughlin seemed maybe advantageous. And then by the time there was the late race, there was the yellow towards the end that I guess ultimately Power caused with David there. That negated the whatever benefit might have existed for those guys and the rest of the cars on that strategy. But yeah, I guess I sort of bring all of that up, like more or less just to say, I think it was super impressive that Colton and the 26 team, that they ended up where they were without the benefit of strategy, because there was a lot of cars that just went completely, like decent cars that went completely the other direction. And so I guess all of that amounts to, well, if he just starts further up in the race, even if he starts fifth or sixth or something, I mean, I think there's a chance that he would have been sitting on the pole for this thing, but starts further up, surely he ends up finishing better, or is more clearly in contention with Power, McLaughlin, Newgarden, Malukas for the duration of the race that he was up there, throughout the race. And if you're just running up front, you're taking smaller swings, you're making the car better in more, specific and purposeful kind of ways. When you're having to run the thing through the pack, you're like, whatever, just give me 2 turns of front wing in one direction or another, basically. When you're running up front, you're kind of like, okay, give me like a half a turn on just the left side, I guess the point there is, it's not just that track position's better if you start further up towards the front. If you do really have a good car and you do potential, like, I think what I'm trying to say is there's potential that this could have been a dominant race for Colton had he started at the front, even if it didn't necessarily appear throughout the race, besides restarts and kind of those points in time that he had a, clearly dominant car. Like, it sort of felt like once he got up to the Penskes that, he was kind of stalling out a little bit, basically, once he got out there. The point that I'm making is, had he been up there with them for the entire race, he might have been able to work the car into a window where he was actually better than them at the end. So those are kind of all of the little missed opportunities that you have by just not starting up there. The penalty is just adding insult to injury for him at the end here, which is he is among just a couple of guys here that have a legitimate shot at being able to close the gap to Alex Palou. This is just that little thorn in your side that makes it so you go from at least building a little bit of momentum in that direction to just having it taken away from you and not being able to capitalize on that after a long day. So I think it's a missed opportunity in terms of where you started coming into the weekend. It's still a great recovery, and even with the penalty, it's a super impressive run. That there are high points and positive, encouraging things to take away from into the stretch here. But the way ultimately that it worked out, I think, is a blow to being able to really insert himself back in the championship hunt. So I think broadly it's they'll be sort of ruining the way that this ended up going. I think just given where we are in the season, given the number of races, if this was an event that was like the second or third race in the season, you'd be thinking like, okay, this is one of our weekends that we managed to totally turn it around from something that could have been a complete disaster. But once you get later in the season, you kind of shift your mindset in these situations to like, okay, well, yes, we did that, but we really needed to capitalize here, and we didn't completely do that.
It's definitely disappointing in the sense that, as a neutral, it's just so good to see Colton up there fighting for the championship and being in a position where we can see him performing to the level that everybody knows that he's capable of, and to see a weekend kind of slip through like that is disappointing. But the comeback was amazing, and the way it played out anyway, he wasn't going to make up that many points on Palou, whatever happened, because he ended up in fourth anyway. So we'll mention Palou briefly now anyway. So Colton's Palou's closest challenger, 59 points back. Palou actually extended his lead by 10 points in this race, worked his way forward before all of the kind of chaos and carnage towards the end of the race. He was so close to being taken out in that Power and Rossi incident on the restart. If you go back, you can see him just pull out of line just as the race goes green. Like, just as it goes green, he pulls out of line, and that allows him to kind of move out of the way of that incident happening, which, if it wasn't Alex Palou, you would say was the luckiest thing you'd ever seen. But this guy's just beyond look at this point. He just makes his own, I think. Absolutely incredible to see that happen live and just kind of watch him pull out. It's like, who's that car pulling out? Of course, it's Alex Palou. And then he was able to make up positions at the end. I was really interested in the whole Ganassi thing because I wondered after the final restart whether they would keep Linus behind Palou as a blocker behind him to stop Palou losing any more positions, but they didn't do that. Linus blew by him pretty much instantly. So there was definitely no team orders there, but it actually worked out in Palou's favour because Linus then went and passed Colton, and then Colton blocked him and lost another spot. So it actually worked out in the most perfect way it could have worked out, where Palou actually ended up finishing ahead of Colton instead of behind. So I don't know if they drew it up that way. I'd love to see that Ganassi whiteboard. Yeah, if they can draw up my future, that'd be great, because it just seems to me get everything right in that scenario. Yeah, he needs to be outscored now by 14.7 points per race. I did get out of that right. So 14.75 points per race. So that's a pretty big ask over the next 4 races when we see how good Alex Palou's been. And, you know, everyone keeps waiting for him to trip up on oval or not perform so well. And apart from that crash he had in one of the Iowa races, he's been absolutely fantastic on the ovals, really, when you think about it, just in terms of, you know, delivering that consistency. He was second in that other Iowa race, obviously 4th Gateway, 5th in the 500. So, you know, he's basically doing what he normally does on the road and street courses, finishing in the top 5, apart from that one incident. Scott McLaughlin's quite an interesting one. I did have a little think about him in the aftermath of this race after he finished second, and just thinking back to St. Pete and what could have been, you know. I was kind of playing around with the points a little bit, and anyone who knows me will know I love to swap points around and like wonder what different scenarios might have been. And I appreciate you can't do that. You have to do it for the whole grid, and it's very difficult. You go back into all of these kind of nuances of what races do you take points away from in each driver and all that kind of stuff. But if you just gave Scott McLaughlin the second place back at St. Pete and Will Power didn't take him out at Toronto, then you're looking at like a 15-point gap to Palou, which when you just change those two, I mean, they are pretty big things that you have to change. But if you change those two things, from a performance level not really changing on Scott's behalf, he's like right in the mix of being in contention for the championship in that scenario. So definitely some interesting things that have played out in this season, and it's definitely impacted on the outcome. I want to talk a little bit about Penske, because I was kind of watching the aftermath of this race, kind of cringing, to be honest, watching some of the comments that were coming out on social media after this, because I saw lots of people comparing the Power and Malukas incident, the restart, and Colton Herta's blocking penalty, and was just kind of, at this point, pulling my own hair out of my scalp. And there's a reason for that, really. I'll explain it. It's because Colton's block, if you've not seen that, you can go back and IndyCar shared that on Twitter, you can watch it. Colton clearly moves over to block Linus Lundqvist. Like, it's a slam dunk. It's the most obvious blocking penalty you'll see on an oval probably all season. So there's nothing to change that situation. That was a slam dunk penalty. The Power and Malukas one is more difficult because it's subjective. You know, it's who has the corner, where in the corner is each person ahead, what is each driver doing. And on an oval, it's so difficult because you kind of at some point you're kind of asking race control to judge air, because, you know, you've got drivers taking the air off the front wing. There's people moving up and doing different things. It's really difficult to police that kind of thing. And to be honest, if I was in race control, I 100% would have given Will Power a penalty, because I thought he was at fault for that Malukas crash. But it's a very subjective incident, and I could see, I don't know which way you would argue on that one, I'll ask you in a minute, JR, but I've seen people who've argued that, you know, Will had the corner and it was up to him where he went. I felt like he could have moved up out of the way a little bit and given Malukas enough room, and that Malukas would have been behind that lap car on the inside anyway, so Power could have just moved up slightly and would have had the outside line and would have kept the position anyway, so he wasn't in danger of losing the spot in that overtake, in my opinion. But it was an interesting one. And then people kind of saying, well, Power didn't get a penalty, Newgarden didn't get a penalty, and Colton Herta did. So there's some sort of conspiracy going on. So yeah, that was the interesting kind of reading I did after the race. And if you're interested, I wrote a feature about it, which you can go and read on the-race.com, which is, in my opinion, I think a lot of this stems back to St. Pete, because we mentioned it a few minutes ago. You know, people unhappy about what happened there in terms of how Penske acted and what they did. Obviously, they were disqualified with Newgarden and McLaughlin in that race. And I think ever since then, people have really had it out for Team Penske. Probably Newgarden more than anybody. obviously he was the one who was deemed to have had the kind of bigger infraction at that St. Pete race there. But in my opinion, no, I wouldn't have really gone too deep into what race control did in this race. I think we did a couple of episodes ago talk about race control doing a good job when they were kind of being, I don't know if they were being hammered, but they were being kind of called out a little bit for some of the calls they'd made in a previous race. And I think both of our opinions actually just turned out to be that was a really well called race and there was nothing wrong there. And I mean, for me, the power one was a penalty, but I can understand why it wasn't given. And to suggest there's some sort of conspiracy going on there, I think you've seen that Newgarden hasn't done anything wrong. You can see power in Malukas is a subjective incident, and the Colton penalty was a slam dunk. So yeah, I think there's still this bubbling kind of mistrust under the surface of Penske and people not being happy with how they acted at St. Pete, and it's continuing through the year. And I think you see that with the teams and some of the people in the paddock as well of kind of still holding this grudge against Team Penske. What did you make of the power Malukas one, JR? And do you agree with me that it's kind of subjective and that you could probably go either way with it, but you kind of feel like you maybe fall on one side, or how do you feel about that one?
Yeah, I guess my feeling with it was however you want to deal with a penalty or not, that Will definitely did squeeze him. So I guess I'm not sure I feel super strongly about. I mean, it's given that Will ended up kind of out of the race in the end anyway. I think that takes a little bit of the heat out of like it mattering in terms of the way that the race actually turned out or points or whatever else. I think it is something that I would sort of, so given that, I would chalk it up to something that I think race control just should kind of have a look at and consider, is this a thing that I think anytime we get into these situations, particularly in this case where it's kind of ends up not making any difference in terms of the overall outcome, but people are kind of, heated about it. I do think that it's worth basically if you're race control, it's worth looking back at to really understand, is this something that we're risking setting a bad precedent for basically by calling it one way or the other? And so I was, if you'd have called a penalty on it, I would not have been mad at that at all, because I do think that I will basically, and it's just a thing you get into on ovals. Like Will's not trying to squeeze him. I don't think it's just sort of one of those things that you get into the corner, particularly if you're on the high side. Will was not running the second lane very frequently. I don't think he was not one of the drivers that was aggressively just going up there and using that second lane. So it's kind of sketchy being up there. That you can't be too high in the second lane. And so to me, it's like he's driving into the corner. Malukas isn't all the way alongside him. So once you get a car that's when you're on the outside in that situation, once you get a car that is like a little bit ahead of you, then you actually just know that if you bend down into that car, that the likelihood that you crash is fairly high by you just get tangling or kind of bouncing off of that car. Basically, like if it was the other way around and Will's turning his left front down into the side pod of Malukas is just going to stay there because he's hitting the center of mass of Malukas's car, and Will is going to kind of like doink off and end up up in the gray at a bare minimum. So, but when you've got a car that's like a little bit aft of that kind of positioning, you don't have the spatial sense of exactly how much space you have. And I think, I've not been in this exact position, but kind of been in various scenarios that are close enough to this, whether it be at Texas. I mean, even racing at like Pocono back when we used to go there was kind of like this, like through turn one sometimes. Like if it hadn't been swept in a while, you got a narrow lane to be next to somebody. And they've both got a car in front of them, basically. And so you don't, when you're Will in that situation, if I'm trying to kind of like just put myself in his shoes, it's not like you're on new tires. The track hasn't been swept in a while, so you're very concerned. Like you have a kind of subconscious worry about being too high up the track. Cars in front of you are making it so your steering's pretty light anyway. Like he's kind of not really committed to the corner, not really committed to the pass. He's just trying to get through the corner there, basically, himself, just in his own car, not factoring in where anybody else is or whatever else. Steering's probably super light, feeling super numb. Kind of the last thing instinctually that you want to do is open your hands up at that point. And so like I think this is just a situation where Will is just trying to maintain a degree of confidence in the feel of his own car in this particular situation, and is kind of hoping that there's like either enough room for David on the inside without him having to adjust that, or that David just backs out and bails. Like that's really what's going through your head. And when you're in these situations for Will Powell, you're assessing the scenario ahead. You're thinking the guy that's on my inside has nowhere to go here because there's like a car he's going to be jammed up against if he tries to accelerate past me or something. So you're just kind of like, I don't know, 7 out of 10 times that car just bails out, and you're still in like no man's land in the middle of the corner, basically, but at least there's not a car there and you just live to fight another corner. Basically, you kind of like have to deal with this messy situation of cars all jammed up against each other. So if I was just trying to take a guess, I definitely I wouldn't typically say that I feel like I have like great insight into always what's going on, particularly maybe in Willie P's brain. But that in this kind of situation, I feel like that's usually what's happening. You're just kind of stuck driving your own thing, and you're kind of hoping that it just doesn't pan out in a bad way. He's not purposefully trying to pinch David there. It would look much different than that had that been what he was trying to do. So ultimately, I think it just comes down to, I think it would have been fair for a penalty to be assessed. He ended up with a self-inflicted penalty by winning or whatever. It ended up being a non-issue in terms of the result of the race, basically. So it's worth IndyCar having a look at just to sort of see like, and generally speaking, yeah, I think we're definitely in like, just take the tinfoil hats off, everybody. Like, this is not, there's no like race control certainly if you're concerned about like there being some, deep state group of people within the IndyCar series that's working on behalf of Penske, like it's not race control. So I don't know, like that like, can we just sell that at least as like can we cross that off the list of the things that we're thinking are coming into play here? Like Roger has zero influence on the way that race control is like making calls here, team to team, car to car, like whatever. I'm sure he's like not even talking to those guys at all. So like that seems like a bizarre, I feel like there's a GIF that is like Charlie from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, that he's like chain smoking cigarettes with like the John Nash, red lines between all of the stuff behind him. Like we need to move a little further away from that kind of vibe here, I think.
There's lots of very interesting things that you said there. Mainly, it just triggered in my mind that this is much more track specific than it would be on a road or street course, because maybe not street course because they can be quite tight and narrow, but when you've got two competitors, one of them's trying to overtake the other one on a road course, then generally there's enough space. You've just got two drivers who are going for the optimum line, and they can, like, there's enough room for them to bail out and still stay in the race. Whereas I guess the argument you could have at Gateway, or especially in like recent IndyCar oval racing on a lot of tracks, is that the second lane isn't always there. And you can't just expect power to move up half.
Not always length. There, and it's really narrow.
Yeah.
If it is.
Yeah. So you can't just expect power to move half a car length up the track and like be confident that he's not just going to fly into the outside wall when he does it. So I thought I'd just briefly kind of like read out the rule, which is 933 in the IndyCar rulebook. It's the primary responsibility for avoiding contact with a competitor resides with the overtaking competitor, and the secondary responsibility resides with the competitor being overtaken. So I guess in the ideal scenario there, Malukas bails out of that and then continues, right? I think that's the primary that's the best case scenario outcome in terms of the rule book and that track. But then you're asking the rules to be applied to a certain track and a certain set of scenarios, and that's why, again, it's so subjective and so difficult to do, because you've got rules that are written, and those rules are written fine, but they're not written specifically to a corner of a certain track in certain conditions on a certain day, on a certain month, on a certain year. So it's really tough to kind of place the blame in that one. I think initially I was too harsh on Power, because when you watch it happen, you're just like, well, he just didn't leave enough room there. But then when you walk all that back and kind of understand the nuances of overtaking on an oval, I don't necessarily think David did anything wrong, but I don't necessarily think that Power deserved a penalty either. And so the outcome was probably correct. So maybe I've even changed my own mind of where I think that was at. I think maybe no penalty was probably better. If you want to listen to an episode with David Malukas, you can go back. He was on last week's episode and talked about his move to Foyt for next season, and a little bit about Gateway, where he was so strong and so unfortunate to miss out on a podium or a top 5 or anything really with that incident. So yeah, go back and listen to that episode. For now, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to head over to Toby Sowery and talk to him about Portland. A very interesting interview, and it was nice to get someone on the pod who's trying to forge his way in IndyCar. We get a lot of winners and champions on the podcast, obviously, because they're the ones who grab the headlines and the people that want to hear from, but it's really nice to kind of do a little bit of talking to someone who's at the other end of the spectrum, basically trying to fight their way onto the grid and do it in a really interesting way. So without further ado, we'll head over to Toby Sowery. Toby Sowery, thanks for joining us on the Race IndyCar Podcast. It's been I'm sure, a very crazy year for you. Tell us a little bit about how the last sort of 2 months has been. I'm sure you didn't expect to be, in an IndyCar. Well, I'm sure you were hoping you would be in an IndyCar at some point, but I'm sure you weren't expecting you would be. So, give us a flavour of how this year's played out for you.
Yeah, honestly, it's been manic is the best way I can describe it, but in a good way. Like I said, the last 6 weeks have been quite wild. I've been on a plane more than I haven't, just going from race event to race event. So it's been super challenging, mentally and physically, just, keeping that performance up and not being tired at the right time. And it's been tough, but a very warm challenge that I've kind of enjoyed having to go through. But yeah, like you said, a few races in IndyCar as well. So it's been a project that's been in the works for a long time and something that I've aimed for years now. So to finally get myself into an IndyCar race it's been a huge tick on the list that is an extremely rewarding one to do.
Yeah, for sure. I guess a lot of people will have seen you coming up through the ranks in British Junior single seaters, and then obviously with your few years in Indy Lights as well. So I'm sure people will be aware of kind of what you were doing on the way up. But I guess you had that test with Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan at Sebring last year. But then I think most people would be kind of, feel like you maybe came from nowhere a little bit when it came for the Dale Coyne racing seat. So tell us a little bit about how that all kind of fell into place for you and how you ended up actually getting to drive in an IndyCar this year in a proper race situation.
Yes. So like you said, I think the last few years have been a bit, I think you said episodic, which was a pretty perfect way to describe it. It's since COVID, really, I've had the COVID season, we did nothing. Unfortunately, Indy Lights was cancelled. So then I went back for 2021 with Young Cross Racing. Didn't manage to finish the season. And then I had another year off in 2022. So there's been in the last, 4 or 5 years, I've had probably just as many off seasons as I have on. So to get the test with Rahal was kind of that start of momentum again, I guess. I also had 2 Indy NXT races in the same season as that. So it was kind of important for me to get that momentum and kind of hype back around my name, because, you lose that very easily, and it's quite a powerful tool. So, we managed to secure the test with Rahal, had a very good day with them. Obviously, first time in an IndyCar, it's always something memorable and a very enjoyable experience for any driver that gets that first day in. And there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes, trying to make things work out for this season, but it didn't quite come to fruition. How many drivers get to say that is probably more than the ones that don't. So it's part of racing, and I'm not upset about that. They were very catering, very helpful, and it kind of put my name back in the mix of IndyCar drivers or potential IndyCar drivers. So I think that's really kind of what led up to this opportunity with DCR, with Dale Coyne this year. Just, having at least driven a car and have that experience kind of really does change people's perspective and willingness to help. It's very difficult to get a drive without having any experience, but then again, it's also very difficult to gain any experience without, kind of finding that slim margin and opportunity. So I think the best thing with the test is it really kind of changed that perspective of, oh, he's driven the car now. And, there was a lot of laps that day, and Rahal were very kind and complimentary of what they said after the test. So I think it's a small paddock, and, hopefully that's done enough justice to kind of open the door. But it obviously had. Dale approached us towards the start of the season, but unfortunately we didn't really have anything come together. So, we kept in contact and managed to actually secure, as is now, 3 races with him. And they've both been fantastic races, and honestly, just a very good experience, as well as somewhere that, I'd love to continue working in the future and try and help bring up, as a driver and as a team.
Yeah. I guess I'm keen to know how quickly you adapted to the IndyCar, because you've come into Dale Coyne in a season where I don't think anyone would argue with me and say that it's been quite a difficult year for that team, just in the case of having lots of different drivers in the car, maybe not having that consistency of having 2 regular drivers fighting for good positions and pushing the team forward kind of every week. But you came in and I think matched the team's best finish of the year with your first result at Mid-Ohio, and then obviously Toronto. IndyCar street racing is, I don't think anyone would play that down in any way. It's a massively difficult thing to do, especially to go to a track that you'd not raced that in an IndyCar before and deliver a top 15 performance. So yeah, I guess, did you feel like you just kind of, really naturally suited the way the IndyCar needs to be driven, and that's really helped you with these results that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was going in and learning as much as I could, as quick as I could. Like I said, I'd had the test with Rahal before, but it was, over a year since that test that I jumped in with Dale. And unfortunately, it wasn't, before the race weekend that I got to drive the car. It was the first practice of the race weekend. So there was a lot there that, I kind of had to learn and adapt to. But I mean, that's kind of our job as drivers. Like everyone has to adapt to something on the fly every weekend. So for me, it was, kind of recouping all the experience and everything I learned from the Rahal test and applying that to the Mid-Ohio weekend. And it obviously went quite well. Like you said, we matched Dale's best result of the year. And I don't think that was necessarily down to just me. I think the guys also got a lot of things right with the car and strategy. And we kind of played kind of aggressive, but smart aggressive, not overly. Throughout the race, kind of just trying to chip away and go forward. And obviously it was the right answer. And like you said, Toronto wasn't quite as good for lots of various reasons, but, still a top 15 finish. We still had to finish the race, and that as people who watch was a task on its own. There were a lot of crashes and some big ones, and there was a lot to avoid. So it was basically putting the pieces together. And obviously, like you said, that's half the game in IndyCar. It's a difficult race to do well in, and sometimes even to finish. So yeah, I mean, the DCR guys have done a fantastic job, and it's always nice to come over with 2 strong results, just to kind of put their effort in, especially when, like you mentioned, that they're having drivers that come in and, do a single event and leave again. So I know after Mid-Ohio, the team are very keen to get me back in for Toronto. As you know, everyone wants the stability. It's just things aren't really kind of lining up that way for them at the moment. So it's unfortunate that that's the case. But again, it also has allowed me to have my first IndyCar opportunity. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts. There's positives in it and there's also negatives.
Yeah, for sure. And you've been racing in LMP2. I know the CrowdStrike APR team are really happy with what you've been doing over there. Do you feel like you mentioned that need and that adaptability as a driver, but I don't think that's something that comes naturally to all drivers, to be able to jump into lots of different cars, and especially to jump into a series like IndyCar that's so cutthroat in terms of the level of competition, and to rock up without a test and to go straight into a practice session and be competitive is more difficult in IndyCar than probably many other racing championships in the world. So do you feel like your kind of diverse kind of racing situation over the past few years has kind of helped you to be able to jump into situations like that, where you do need to just get in the car and drive it quickly, and you don't really have a choice in terms of like having a bit of time to bed in? You've just got to be on the pace immediately.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's kind of summarized my whole career up. Like you said, for me this year, I've been doing LMP2 and IMSA, and for me, that's the new gig. Like, it's not anything that I've done before. I haven't really done much endurance racing. It's only really been this year that it's all started. So that for me was the more alien series out of the two. Obviously, IndyCar is, the top of the single seat ladder in America and pretty much the top anywhere in the world. So that was kind of more of a natural adaptation, I'd guess, especially being more of a single seater driver in the past, 10 years or so. So it's definitely a learning curve with both of them. But like you said, jumping in and kind of allowing yourself to have that time to get up to speed is a bit of a luxury that unfortunately I haven't been able to afford in my career. Everything that I've done, going back to even BRDCF3 back in the days in 2016 and 17, people would do winter testing and I'd have my season announced and sorted a week before the first race. So it always was that waiting game and then eagerness to get going. And it was kind of hit the ground running every single time. And that was not really a choice, but a kind of matter of the facts and something that I had to do. If I fell behind at the first hurdle, then it's really difficult to get back. So I think, in some ways it's been very beneficial to my career. It's not something that I've had to do for the first time in IndyCar or in LMP2. It's fortunately something I've had to do for a long time. So I think, it's a skill that I've had to develop and kind of hone in over the few years that I've had racing. But yeah, I mean, definitely not easy. I would like more testing and practice a bit more and have a bit more time. But, sometimes you don't get that opportunity and you just kind of have to put that aside and do the best you can with the tools and limitation and time that you've got.
Talking of opportunity, you're obviously racing at Portland this weekend, and that's another big opportunity for you to get back in the car again. I guess two-part question, how important is Portland in terms of, putting stuff together for your IndyCar future, and also where are you at with that at the moment in terms of your IndyCar future? Have you noticed the last two races having an impact, and are you hopeful that you will be in contention for a seat on the grid next year, or do you have kind of other plans for next year at the moment?
No, for me, like I said, it's about making the most of the opportunity. So for sure, my goal for these 3 races is to give myself that chance that teams will look at me and go, oh, okay, he's a valuable asset and someone that we could take on and, allow to deliver. That was the whole purpose. I'm not just doing 3 IndyCar races to say, yeah, I've done IndyCar in my life and tell my grandkids one day. That's where I'd like to make my career. So it's really trying, to keep it clean like we did in Toronto and put together a good race, not set the world on fire is the primary goal, but that's kind of the last item to tick. We want to do everything right. We want to be fast. We want to be improving throughout the weekend, learning as much as we can, and then put everything together whilst trying to set the world on fire. Not, go out there and just be blisteringly fast and crash and make mistakes. I want to run a clean weekend. Really try and give the team something to buy into in myself. And I think, Dale and everyone at the team has been very helpful in guiding me to become that. So hopefully, something larger comes out than just these 3 races. That's certainly the goal. For me, that there are conversations already happening towards next season with various people, but they're very early doors, and you've got a lot of drivers in the market right now that have been around for a long time. I mean, look at Rossi; he's probably the hottest driver right now. He's won the Indy 500. He's been in contention with the top teams for years since he's been here, really. So, I've got to try and build my case as something exciting and something that people want to buy into, and someone who can achieve results regardless. And if I do a good enough job at that, then I think there's opportunity, but it's a difficult one because some teams want money, some don't, some want like commitments now, some want them later down the line. It's a juggling act for sure, but like you said, that for me that's the goal. To be in IndyCar for next year full time, and then kind of give myself some time to really kickstart my career.
You can never predict what's going to happen in the IndyCar silly season, that's for sure, Toby. Anything can happen.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully it happens in the right way for me. As I said, at the start of this year, I didn't really have anything IndyCar lined up. So, to do 3 races and kind of be where I am now, it's crazy. And watching how the market's played out through the season, with Teo and McLaren guys and the DCR guys, it's a fluid paddock for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think you definitely would have the best average finish of any of the rookies this year if you took your 2 races and extrapolated that over the course of the season. So a great start to your IndyCar race career, and best of luck for Portland. We hope it goes well for you, and thanks for joining us on the Race IndyCar podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, I know we've just talked about Portland, but I'm not quite done with Gateway yet. I still want to round off a couple of storylines here. Definitely props to Stingray Rob for getting his best finish in IndyCar so far in the top 10, which was crucial. He moved up a place in the leader circle points. So if you're interested in all of that kind of stuff, there's a top 22 in the leader circle. At the end of the year, those top 22 cars were all given $1 million for making it through into that leader circle. It's also got extra kind of added, we think it's got extra added importance this year because it'll no doubt, the leader circle will play into how the charters are given out for next season if we get the charters over the line. That's another story for another day. Ed Carpenter's number 20 car has dropped to 22nd, so that's right on the buffer, 3 points ahead of Connor Daly's car. Great comeback from Connor Daly, by the way, who replaced Agustin Canapino. He was involved in that early crash that also involved Kyle Kirkwood and Roman Grosjean. Both the Hollinger cars qualifying so far up and were taken out so quickly in the race, but both of them fought back. Daly was 13th and Grosjean was 16th, which was pretty impressive given where they'd started the race. And that kind of early incident. Wanted to shout out, while we're mentioning Ed Carpenter, Rinus VeeKay was on a run of 4 top 10 finishes and has the 4th best oval average finish this season so far. Given how much of a struggle Ed Carpenter has found ovals himself over the past sort of couple of years, for Rinus to be delivering those kind of results every week is to me is super impressive, given we know what Ed's capable of on an IndyCar oval. So it might not have been the season that Rinus really wanted in terms of his road and street course performance or his championship position, but if you can keep that 4th average finish going for the final group of oval races here, then he's got a good chance of moving up in the championship quite significantly. So we'll keep an eye on that. We mentioned Kyle Kirkwood. Obviously, he was on the show last week as well. You can go back and listen to that episode. He and Marcus Ericsson both basically out of the race. Kirkwood in that crash, and Marcus Ericsson was leading the strategy. It's kind of too complicated to go back into now after all of those late cautions, isn't it? Trying to explain that strategy. It was basically he was trying to do one less stop to the end than the guys who were leading at that time. Scott Dixon was also on that strategy. Had pitted just before a caution came out, which kind of pinned him 2 laps down, and that's why Scott Dixon was 11th in the race. So another reason why he kind of lost out in the championship. We were talking about leader circle. I wanted to quickly mention Dale Coyne as well, because I think Jack Harvey was on for a really, really good finish, at least in terms of that car and what it's been able to do this season. But he was hit by Nolan Siegel in that restart with Rossi and Power, where they were taken out. So that really hurt him. He dropped quite a way down the order. And Catherine Legg, I think she was assessed the penalty for the incident with Ed Carpenter at the start of the race as well. So we kind of wrapped up a lot of the winners and losers there. It's obviously going to come thick and fast now over the final 4 races to see who's going to be the champion and how these leader circle points are going to play out. But it's going to be definitely very interesting.
Yeah, I also want to just shout out a couple of the rookies really quick that I thought Nolan had an awesome race. He looked really good out there, and it reminded me a little watching he and Linus, who I'll kind of pass to you in a second because I'm curious to use him as sort of a the starting point for maybe just how some things are shaping up for next year. He seems like in among the more precarious positions here, despite a couple of podiums here in his rookie year, including a good run here at Gateway. But it was interesting watching a few of those guys. Gateway, this is we've seen it here before with Romain Grosjean. His rookie year here, it was his first oval race, and you kind of saw him doing things that, I mean, I remember talking about it in the pod that are just sort of like, well, I think he's doing this stuff just because he doesn't know any better, basically, but it's working. And like you kind of saw that play out in a successful run through a difficult pack and making passes that even the experienced guys up at the front were not sort of taking the same kinds of risks. I felt like this was it was similar watching Nolan. I mean, I remember even Kirkwood in his rookie year at like Texas, like some other places where, thinking back to being a rookie or being, early in my career, you go to some of these places and you just sort of don't know what you don't know. And so you don't have this preconception of what, you sort of know from talking to other drivers, like you have some awareness at least for the fact that, all right, you're going to have the second lane. Maybe it materializes, maybe it doesn't. It's going to be really bad offline outside of the second lane if you get up into the gray. All of the drivers who have been in the series for like more than 3 or 4 years or something, and I would almost say particularly the old heads, like the guys that have really been around for a long time when there's been a lot of oval racing, a lot more oval racing in the championship, those drivers have all built up a level of experience of getting up in the gray and smashing into walls, whether it be in practice or qualifying or the race or whatever, that you kind of have this like predisposition to assessing there to be a fairly high degree of risk to going out there. Like you only go out there when either you can or when you absolutely need to, basically. And then the young guys, they sort of go up there once and it feels all right. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And they just keep doing it. It's sort of when you're more attached to just the feeling of the car, once you're sort of, developing those neural pathways as you're going. So you don't have this like built-in thing that's like, oh, well, that's high risk. So I'm just not going to do it unless I have to. You just kind of, if it feels good, you just keep doing it. And maybe that bites you in the ass at some point. Like at some point it will eventually, whether it's, Saturday's race at Gateway or at some other time. But I always kind of like seeing that because it's something that I know that the guys at the front of the field or even the teammates of those drivers, they can't not pay attention to that. Also, when you're around somebody who's out there who you kind of, for one reason or another, recognize like, well, they don't really there's no particular reason that they can do this and I can't. It's not like it's not because they're on new tires. It's not because their car is set up different than mine or whatever. I sort of enjoy seeing that occur, and it really it's not something that you really see at road and street courses, not even something you see at this point like at the speedway. But on these short oval tracks, when you get these kind of like quasi second lane situations going on, you saw a little bit more of that happen. So was just kind of cool to see. It definitely made me in a way, it makes you appreciate then when you do see Newgarden and McLaughlin and some of those guys up there using the second lane, that it's like, oh, there's a degree of adaptiveness that some of those guys have, that they're able to kind of push through the knowing that that's risky, and they're able to just take stock of, well, if other guys can do it, then I can do it. And so I'm going to just do it, basically, in these kinds of situations. So There's maybe a little bit more to that in terms of confidence that you have in your car and all that kind of stuff. But Linus was also one of those guys throughout the course of this race. What's his? He seems to be at best on the hot seat for next year. So, we've heard a lot about Ganassi just downsizing. That's a part of why we're probably having this conversation. What's your take on what his options are going into next season?
Well, first of all, you're right. He had a great race. Obviously, one of those people who was able to move forward before all of those kind of late cautions, got himself into a position where he was on fresh tyres, and then as soon as he had a sniff of anywhere near the front of the field, like, he was gone, wasn't he, in that final stint there? He was absolutely brilliant. So had so much pace. I wonder if they changed something on the car in that final stop where it just kind of unlocked something for him, or if it was just that he'd had that car for a little while and just hadn't had the kind of freedom to really use it, just caught up in traffic or quite a bit further back in the pack or whatever. That was definitely interesting. But it's been a crazy year for him, hasn't it? I mean, he had a pole at Road America in incredible circumstances. Now he's had the 2 podiums, one at Barber and one here. Both this one and the Barber one kind of fight back, drive through the fields in kind of different circumstances. The Barber one was a little bit more strategy based, but again, when it came down to it, he was able to push hard in the final stint and deliver the goods. So I just think it'll be really sad if he does fall off the grid. He's the first rookie since 2021, Romain Grosjean, to have 2 podiums in a year, and he's just had so much poor fortune. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know people will hear me say all this and they'll be like, he's made mistakes as well. Of course he has. He's had bad races and things have gone wrong, and he's made some mistakes like any driver. But I think when you weigh him up against some of the things that have gone against him, like he was taken out at St. Pete by Grosjean, didn't get enough fuel in at the Indy GP. There was 500 where he did crash in practice, in fairness, and that put him quite far back in terms of where he qualified. But then he was taken out in that lap 1 crash, so we don't know how he would have fought back from that. He was in multiple crashes at Detroit that weren't his fault, and then he had a mechanical issue in the first race at Iowa as well. So that's 5 races straight off the bat that weren't his fault, that have just kind of like disappeared from his points total, basically. So I think he's had some really poor fortune, and I hope the other teams in the paddock can assess him in the same way and work out that he's done a pretty good job. Portland this weekend. If you're a kind of person who's wanting the championship to be a bit closer, then I wouldn't say don't watch this weekend, but Alex Palou is pretty good at Portland. So if you're looking for the championship lead to change significantly, you're probably going to be looking at the 3 oval races that follow. But yeah, Portland's going to be. The one thing I will say about Portland is there can be kind of. It used to be that like one of the big teams would test there and find something, and the others wouldn't test there and didn't find anything, and it would kind of be like this kind of pendulum effect of that working around. But because of the hybrid, we've had less testing in this kind of post-hybrid period. So we've not had any like one team go there and do a test and that are likely to find something major there. So it's going to be much more the teams adapting what they know from last year to the hybrid and trying to work out what's best and how best to use it. I'm excited to see another proper road course race on, with the hybrid, because we had that lovely little taster at Mid-Ohio where if you're into the kind of the technical aspect of it all and how it all kind of played out with the hybrid, it's something that didn't have a major effect in terms of performance, but was something that like all the teams are doing something a little bit different with, trying to find some advantages. And if you're into all that kind of marginal gain stuff, then Mid-Ohio was a lovely kind of whet the appetite situation. And then we didn't really get that at any of the following races because we had the street course and then the road course on the ovals. So it'll be interesting to get back to Portland and see how all of that plays out. Make sure you watch that this weekend. Indy next in action as well. Louis Foster can wrap up the championship. I don't think he will necessarily, because I think he probably needs to take quite a few more points than are going to be available to him, but it's possible it could be done there. So keep an eye on Indy next as well. And we'll be back with the next episode of the Race IndyCar Podcast after Portland. Thanks for joining us.
The Athletic.